All right, so this is going to be episode 2 of deck profiles for Scarlet and Violet to journey together. This episode is going to be about Dusknoir Luxray. All right, so if you've been following the competitive Pokemon trading card game scene for some time and have been an active part of it, you're pretty you feel pretty melancholy, I would say, about rotation. Um, Rotation took away a lot of very, I would say, and not because inherently they're toxic, but just because of how they warped the format, they're toxic. Rotation took away a lot of toxic cards, right? I don't want to, shut up any memories for anybody watching this, but nor do I want to for myself either, because the format was pretty, Brilliant Stars on was it was pretty tumultuous, I would say. Um and so with the rotation, it took away a lot of cards that were pretty oppressive, right? Um and so it gave us a lot of um you know um agency to basically explore and um really try to shape the format in a way that is, which is ultimately the goal, is that to shape the format in a way that is um, merit based, basically, right? And it's very possible. And so for the next few installments of this series, I'm going to be focusing mainly on covering basically um and I'm this is very kind of hard to put into words because um it's not that these things have been overlooked or that these things have been um just undiscovered. And so yeah, that's why it's just hard to put into words, but I'm not gonna try to labor that. um I'm just gonna say that don't scratch that. For the next few installments of the series, going to be um, basically given a very good analysis of the format relative to what we've been seeing from the so-called Pokemon community. Right? I don't want to, draw battle lines or anything like that, but yeah, uh, if you've watched my videos about VGC and covered some of the videos that I made in Brilliant Stars and on formats, um, you know that I'm very outspoken about how people just generally don't play Pokemon, right? And I'm not going to get too much into that in this video, but that's just kind of that's what you should keep in mind when you're watching this, right? And so, yeah, I'm going to just really give a really good analysis of the format and really try to shed a light on archetypes that are just completely overlooked. And really, I think for the next 6 videos, I think I'm going to, and I say six specifically because generally, when it comes to meta shares, you want to look at, basically the top three decks and then like the three decks that, compete against them, right? So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next 6 videos. I'm going to be looking at the top three decks and I'm going to be looking at three decks that compete against them. All right. So hope you look forward to that. And so this first video is going to be about um, Dusknoir Luxray, right? So my first video, I covered Magmortar Volcanion and basically just harped on the fact that um, basically with the with the rotation of Lost Zone decks, we just had a rut of what to play in terms of mid range decks, or how we call it Pokemon checkmate decks, right? And so yeah, that video was basically just to whet the appetite of players who are basically just feeling a void of, oh my gosh, I don't know what to play. You know, like it's 40% Dragapult, and then if I'm not playing Dragapult, I have to play Goldengo or something like that, right? And so yeah, that video was basically to cover that, and so um, it was, I feel like it was a very successful video and very informative, and very helpful and very valuable, right? So yeah, that's basically what I strive for, and so yeah, um, this deck is actually probably on another level than Arcadian Magmortar in that it features probably the most notorious card in the format, and yet it's not been discussed one iota of whether it would be on its own just a good archetype. So this video is gonna try to help alleviate some of that and try to help people understand kind of why this format seems so coin flip, you know? So yeah, I'm just gonna get right into it. Right. So this is Dusknoir Luxray. Alright, so Dusknoir, um stage 2, 160 HP psychic Pokemon with the ability Curse Blast. Once during your turn, you may put 13 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Use this ability, this Pokemon is knocked out. Then it has the attack Shadow Bind for 2 psychic, and a colorless does 150 damage during your opponent's next turn. The defending Pokemon can't retreat. Right. So this card was printed in Shrouded Fable. Um, and Shrouded Fable is a pretty important set for um, the Scarlet and Violet era, in that it printed a lot of very important staples that are pretty much like necessities in a lot of decks, right? Um, but a card that rose above all from that format was, I mean, from that set was of course Dusknoir. And since Dusknoir has come out, it has been the subject of a lot of um very uh very very decks, decks that are in the format. Let's just put it like that. It's been the subject of decks that are in the format. I'll just put it like that, right? Um, and so yeah, you know, not to get too much into the controversy of this card, but yeah, this card is very good, right? 13 damage counters is enough to knock out a lot of support Pokemon, right? And so yeah, trade a 1 for 1, or maybe even 2 for 1 if you're hitting like something like a Squawk ability if it has 3 damage on it. Is pretty good, right? So yeah, uh, needless to say, this card has gotten a lot of play since since it's been released, right? So with this attack cost and basically with how this format is basically unfolded, right? We think, okay, well, it has this great attack ability, but you're probably not going to use this attack, and that's where you just have to stop yourself and just show yourself the door, because clearly you're not informed on basically how this format is supposed to be played, right? Um, so yeah, so this card came out in Strata Fable, right? But they've been printing cards to help support single prize evolution decks, and mainly the card that they printed to support those decks was this card Reversal Energy, right? So this card reads just like any other special energy, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon provides colors energy, and generally just has an effect, right? You have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and this card is attached to an evolution Pokemon that doesn't have a Roblox. This card provides every type of energy, but only provides 3 energy at a time. Right? Um, so this card, has been in format since Paldea evolved, right? So that was like February 2023, if I'm not mistaken, right? And uh or June or something like that, I don't know. But yeah, this card has been printed in was printed in Proudly Evolved, right? And since then they've supported the card significantly with a lot of pretty good um attackers that can attack for 3 energies, right? And so obviously the card that they printed, as a flagship partner for Reversal Energy was Luxray, right? Has the ability Soul and Flash, right? Once you're in your turn, this Pokemon is your hand. You have more prize cards in your arena than your opponent. You may put this Pokemon onto your bench, right? Stage 2 and 150 Lightning Pokemon has the attack Wild Charge. For Lightning and 2 colorless, does 180 damage, right? And so, yeah, generally, that's a combo that you'd want to go with, right? Is that you would bench this when you're behind, and then you can attack with it using Universal Energy, right? So that's kind of what Pokemon was going for with yeah kind of building reverse energy decks, right? This is being your main attacker, and then you'd have Pokemon behind it, right? Because if you understand type ins from like the core games, you know that Lightning, which is electric in the core games, is a very defensive type. Has only one weakness, right? And so kind of think of this card similar to how you would play a light electric Pokemon in the core game, right? Where it would be a basically a defensive Pokemon, right? So generally, this is a Pokemon that you put up so that you could set up a board that where other Pokemon can use the reverse energies besides just Luxray, right? So that's kind of what Pokemon was trying to go for, right? And so um, yeah, so with reversal energy in format, right, and this card having 3 energy attack cost, and it being an evolution Pokemon that doesn't have a Roblox, if this format has been unfolding, right, um, properly, then you know we would understand that this is an actual archetype in and of itself. It's not a tech card that you put in, Roblox decks so that you can win in one turn, right? It is an attacker, right? So, and what lends more credence to that premise is the fact that it's stage one, Dusclops, 90 HP psychic Pokemon, has the exact same ability, Curse Blast. Except what it does is instead of doing 13 damage counters, it's just 5 damage counters, right? And the damage, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary because there's a lot of pretty important Pokemon in the format that have like 50 HP. Call for Family Pidgey, and then baby Pokemon which have 30 HP. But generally, what you'd want to be doing is that you'd be setting up like a Dusclops, for example, setting up a Dusknoir, and probably if you're even on prizes, you'd use Curse Blast, right? So that you can go behind the prizes, and then you would attach reversal energy to Dusknoir and attack with Shadow Bind, right? So that was kind of what Pokemon was trying to go for, right? And so to see that this deck has completely just been overlooked, right? And again, that's being very generous, is a travesty, right? And it's not just a travesty to the deck; it's a travesty to basically um, the merit-based goal that Pokemon has for its franchise, right? So yeah, this is gonna try to help alleviate that a little bit, and so I hope you enjoy. All right. So this iteration of Dusknoir Luxray, um, it plays 2-2-2 line, right? So plays two Duscles, plays two Dusclops, and plays two Dusknoir. Then it plays two Luxray, and then your main Pokemon you're going to be evolving is going to be the Dunsparce, right? So you play 3-3 line of the Dunsparce from Temporal Forces, right? And then you play one copy of the Dunsparce EX from Journey Together, right? So generally, what you're trying to accomplish with this deck is you're basically trying to just set up your hand so that you can basically react to the lines that your opponent takes, right? That's ultimately how these decks work, right? If you've been playing Pokemon for a while, right, and you're familiar with like the Sun and Moon era, you're familiar with cards like Counter Energy, right, where they only activate when your opponent is ahead on you on prizes, right, and they provide every type of energy, but they provide a certain amount, right? So you had cards like Tapu Lele, right, Shaman, um, Mew, right, from X and Y, that could use counter energy and basically cheat um very expensive attacks, right, for basically one attachment, right? So that's essentially what they're trying to accomplish with this archetype, right? So that's essentially what you're trying to go for, right? Is that you're basically trying to just um win against matchups basically where you wouldn't be able to just trade back and forth, right? This is not a deck that's gonna beat single prize decks, right? I mean, it can, and it probably should, right? But this is not a deck that you're gonna use to beat single prize decks. This is a deck that you're going to use to basically knock out Pokemon that are, you know, um, like in your range, right? But aren't necessarily the Pokemon that your opponent is using as their win condition, right? So we're gonna get into some of the numbers that you can hit in this deck, and you can hit any number, obviously, right? 13 damage counters, right? Plus 180 damage, right? That's like 310 already, right? And then I haven't even gone to the mods, damage modifiers, right? So right? It's not about what numbers you can hit. Obviously, you can hit any numbers, but let's just talk about specific numbers that you're trying to hit, right? So, um, so for the cool cards for this deck, um, play two Defiance Band, right? And so Defiance Band combos very well with this deck in that not only are you going to be behind the prizes, but you're basically going to be able to have a very low maintenance attack, right? So this is a very good combo piece for getting knockouts, right? And so Defiance Band reads: if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, you attack the Pokemon this card is attached to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon, right? So attach this to something like a Luxray, for example, and you're doing 210 damage, right? 210 damage, that's Pokemon like, Steel Mask Ogrepawn, right? Has a Dippity, right? So you're going to be able to get very key two-price knockouts, right? And so that's essentially what you're trying to go for, right? This is a format that has a lot of decks that play these, 210 HP Pokemon, and so don't think of it as, oh my gosh, how am I going to knock out a Charizard EX, right? Think of it like, how am I going to sequence knocking out key two prizers so that my finisher can be knocking out a Charizard EX, right? So, yeah, that's kind of the philosophy of this deck, right? So let's just get into um, cards in this deck, right? So again, play 2/2/2 Dusklops. I mean Dusknoir, right? Play 2 Luxray. Play 3/3 the Dunsparce. Then you play one copy of the Dunsparce EX. Play one Fan Rotom. And then you play one Dedenne from Surgeon Sparks. And play one copy of Lily's Clefairy EX. Right? So the Fan Rotom, of course, is a starter, right? Um, the Denny is like, again, right? If you're familiar with the core game, you're familiar with the Denny's typing. The Denny is an electric fairy, so of course this card is supposed to be like a support, right? And so, yeah, this is basically like a support that you're gonna put in front of your Dusclops and your the Dunsparces, for example, right? As you attack a electromagnetic sonar. Put a trade card for your discard pile into your hand. It has the attack now for psychic energy. That's 30 damage, right? So very good wall in this deck or support, if you will. Um, you know, um, Badoo's in this format, 30 HP. So it's just a knockout on Badoo. And even if you can't use your attack because you've attached a reversal energy, for example, you can still use electromagnetic sonar. They can't knock you out because they're attacking with Badoo, right? So very good board state you can set up with pushing this card as your support, right? Then the one copy Lily's Clefairy EX, right? This card is basic, 190 HP psychic Pokemon. Has the ability Fairy Zone. The weakness of each of your opponent's Dragon Pokemon in play is now psychic, right? Now has the attack Fumu Rondo for psychic and a colorless. Does 20 plus. This attack does 20 more damage for each bench Pokemon, right? Both yours and your opponent's, right? So this card is basically what makes this deck like significantly better, right? So it's like, um, yeah, right. Like this deck was already good enough considering the fact that you could just put 13 damage counters into play. Now you can make Dragon Pokemon weak to Psychic, so every single Dragon Pokemon is in your range with Shadow Bind. So it's a single price Pokemon that's trading 2 for 1 against Pokemon like Raging Bolt and Dragon Bolt EX, right? Best of both worlds, right? Then the one copy, the Dunsparce EX, discard stage 1, 270 HP, colorless Pokemon, as attack Tenacious Tail. For a colorless energy, does 60x. Attack does 60 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon EX in play. Then Destructive Drill for 3 colorless, 150 damage. Attack isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So I would say this is probably one of the best design cards coming out of Journey Together, right? So this card, right? So if you kind of got a peek at the trading cards I played for this deck, right? You may have noticed that I don't play any cards that pick up Pokemon from play or switch your Pokemon or anything like that. And I also play the Dunsparce EX, right? Which has 3 retreat costs, right? And Reversal Energy does not give this Pokemon 3 energy. It only gives it a colorless because the errata for this card reads that your evolution Pokemon doesn't have to can't have a rule box, right, for this card's effect to come into play. Right. So if you attach this to a Dusknoir EX, it's only gonna have one colorless energy attached to it. So you can use Tenacious Tail and that's it. Right. And the thing is that when you're attacking with the Dusknoir EX, you're not gonna want to retreat it. Right. That's not what you're trying to do. Right. This is like your um these are like your basically your heal Pokemon. If you want to put it like that, if you want to use like a wrestling term, um, or this would be more like a raid boss, right? It's a raid boss, not a heal, right? Um, so like you're not like if you play a lot of like for example MOBAs or like games like that, right? Team games like that. You're familiar with the term raid boss, right? Which is basically it's a meme. It's not actually a real like concept that needs to be understood. It's just a meme. But it's basically when like a player on the team's character gets like so powerful that like they become like a problem. Right? That's the best way of putting um raid boss, right? And that's basically what this card is trying to function as, right? It's not something where it's like, oh, I attack with Tenacious Tail and then I retreat into my Dusknoir and then I use Shadow Ball. No, you're just gonna go Tenacious Tail, Tenacious Tail, Tenacious Tail, and the game's over, right? That's basically what this card is trying to do, right? It's basically trying to prevent your opponent from just being like, okay, I'm gonna open Squawkabilly EX, right? I'm gonna discard my hand, draw six, and then I'm gonna bench a Pheasantipity, I'm gonna bench two Ogrepons, and I'm gonna pass, right? Your opponent's not gonna be able to do that because Tenacious Tail is in play, right? That's essentially what they're trying to do. It's trying to limit your opponent's bench, right? And then um the second attack lends more credence to this premise because its effect is that its card damage attack damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So you're not going to be able to retreat this Pokemon, and there's not a Pokemon that you can push to stop this Pokemon, right? So that's basically how this card functions, right? So you're not don't think of this card like, oh, I have this card in this deck that has all these ways to retreat and take cards out of play and stuff like that. And then this card, I can't do anything after I put it into play, and it's because you're not supposed to, right? So don't try to be like, oh, I'm gonna put a Turo in my deck or I'm gonna play School of Cyclone. No, right? So yeah, that's kind of how this card is supposed to function, right? So I think I covered all the Pokemon, right? So um get into the trainer cards. This is where the deck gets really, really interesting, right? So, um, search obviously we play four Buddy Buddy Poffins, play four Ultra Balls, right? And then our other starters we have four Arvins, four Ionos, right? Two Artisans, right? And then another starter we play in this deck is Deduction Kit. This card was printed in Surgeon Sparks and it reads: look at the top three cards of your deck, put them back in any order, or shuffle them and put them on the bottom of your deck. Right. So, um, you know, you generally have these cards in format. These are like these are starters, right? So if you're familiar with the trading card game, right? We have cards like Acrobike, Trekking Shoes, etc. And this is kind of a take on those card starters, right? Except this card, or like like Pokédex, cards like that, right? This card has a much more powerful effect, right? In that you could see, right, basically like depending on how many cards you're drawing with like your abilities or your other trainer cards and stuff like that. For example, for this deck, the main draw engine is the Dunsparce, which lets you draw three cards, right? You could see basically six cards with this deck, with this card, right? If you look at the top three cards of your deck and you don't like them, you can put them in your body or deck, and then you can see 3 more cards with your runaway draw, right? So as opposed to something like a trekking shoes where you're only seeing a maximum of 2 cards, right, or 3, depending on how many cards you're drawing, doesn't matter, right? This card lets you see like 3 plus how many cards you're drawing from your abilities, right? So very powerful starter, right? Um, and so again, right, don't want to labor this point too much, but um, this card has seen absolutely no play, right, since it's been printed, right, and again, right, it's just I'm not gonna get into it, right. So those are your starters for the deck, right? Then um you're gonna want to like open like an evolution, right? So I play 1 copy of Technical Machine Evolution, right? As it gives your it's a tool card. Gives the Pokemon an attack evolution for color synergy. Choose up to your two of your opponent. Choose up to 2 of your bench Pokemon. For each of those Pokemon, search your deck for a card that evolves from that Pokemon and put it on that Pokemon to evolve it, right? So basically, what it does is it lets you evolve, a Dunsparce and like a Duskull, for example, and then you can, for example, evolve it into a Duskclaw, into a Dusclops. Going into your turn, you can evolve it into Dusknoir, right? So you can get to Dusknoir without having to use a rare candy, right, on your second turn, right? Obviously, it's not a line that you're gonna want to crutch on. It's just a line that you want to have, so you just play 1 copy, right? And then also play 1 copy of Counter Gain, right? Um, so Counter Gain, if you have more prize cards remaining in your opponent, tax this Pokemon. Pokemon this card is attached to cost cardless less. So, um, so basically, what this card does is it lets you basically cheat an attack with like Lazy Fairy, for example, right? Where with Lazy Fairy's attack, generally your attack's gonna cost um Psychic and a Colors. Instead, with the counter game, it's only going to cost Psychic, right? So, again, right, comboing this card with like Dusknoir and stuff like that, you can be taking 3 prizes, right, um, on a turn, right? And so, yeah, very key card, very key card in this deck, right? And then, last tool card we play, I already covered like Defiance Band, right? Maybe I'll cover it again though, but play Techno Machine Crisis Punch, right? So um again, another Techno Machine card. The card this card is attached to gets the attack Crisis Punch. 3 colors energy, it's 280 damage. You can use this attack only when your opponent has exactly 1 prize card remaining, right? So this is basically what makes this deck so powerful, right? So again, right, this card was printed in Paldean Fates, right? And in that format, we still had like Lost Zone decks and stuff like that. And the main attacker, of course, in Lost Zone decks was um Cramorant, right? So, when you had 4 cards in your Lost Zone, the card can attack for free, right? So generally the only deck that people were really playing this card in was in Lost Zone decks, right? Where you attach to a Cramorant, try to use a Crisis Punch in the late game, right? And that's all well and good, but you notice this card's attack cost is 3 colors energy. So again, what card in this format gives your Pokemon 3, you know, um, energy to attack with, right? So very, readily seeable that, you know, this card was meant to be played with reverse energy decks, right? And so obviously, when you use it, it gets discarded. But, you know, with all the other, powerful tactics you have in this deck and, abilities and stuff like that. Obviously, you're not going to be able to use Dusknoir to close the game after you use Cross's Punch, Dusknoir's ability rather, and Dusknoir's attack. So you're not going to be able to attack with Shadow Bind. But you have, Tenacious Tail, right? You have Assault Landed, right? If it really gets desperate, right? And so again, right? This deck is not about, oh, how am I gonna win in 2 turns? This deck is about basically how am I gonna sequence it so that I can attack, you know, with my energies and, take a lead and, close the game, without putting myself in an odd prize situation, right? So it's not just like, oh, this card, oh, it only does 100 damage. You have to have 3 energies, so high maintenance. It's not high maintenance. That card is very low maintenance. It's just basically you're not just going to just be able to, um, you know, if you want to use a, Brilliant Stars analogy, you're not just going to be able to go, Candy Charizard, Candy Dusknoir and just win. I mean, Candy Charizard, Candy Pidgeot and just win, right? So again, right? It's just a matter of, again, I don't want to labor this point, right? That's not what this video is about. So this is basically just, so you can take a good, big knockout, even when your opponent is at one prize and you can't use stuff like Dusknoir, right? So other win conditions in this deck besides like Crisis Punch, you have Counter Catcher, 2 copies, right? You can play this card only if you have more prize cards than your opponent, which on your opponent's bench Pokemon with active Pokemon, right? So, right, you'd combo this with like Dusclops, Dusknoirs, or if you're just behind on prizes, right? Or rather ahead on prizes, you can just go Luxray, Reversal Energy, and then Counter Catcher up, something that you can knock out, right? Play 1 copy of Boss Orders, right? If you have a really good board state, um, and then Define Span, play 2 copies, right? And then Rare Candy, um, another very good win condition in this deck. Um, lets you basically use 2 Dusknoirs and use 2 Dusknoirs on a turn, right? Without having to have like 2 Dusclopses on your board, right? And then the Ace Spec, right, which is like crown jewel of this deck, right? Neutralization Zone, printed in Shroud of Fable, right? Stadium reads prevent all damage done to Pokemon that don't have a Roblox by attacks from the opponent's Pokemon EX and Pokemon V, right? This card cannot be put in your hand or deck from the discard pile, right? So this card got printed. Um, obviously people were speculating, oh, we could play this with you know, um Boss Zone, right? Set up a checkmate board state. And eh. I don't know what else to tell you, right? Like just like that's all well and good, right? But Lost One's just gonna win anyways, right? So why would you play neutralization zone? um, the checkmate board state that you want to set up with this card is not Lost Zone, but it's with a Luxray, for example, right? If your opponent, right, is running hot, right, you're not going to want to have to, sequence setting back up a Luxray and then having to use Wild Charge again, right? You have, cards in this deck, right? For example, you have played 4 cards of 4 copies of Iono, right? And so you could, Dusclops or Dusknoir your opponent, push a Luxray with a Reversal Energy and a Defiance Band, and then you can Iono them, right? and have a neutralization zone in play, and your opponent's going to need so many outs that it's just going to be unfeasible for them to win, right? That's how you want to play this card, right? You don't want to play this card in a deck that's already winning, and somehow you need to somehow put another win condition into play. It's ridiculous, right? You might as well just play Charizard at that point, right? So that's how you want to use this card, right? And that's basically what this card deck is for, right? And what further lends credence to this premise is that um this deck has a lot of Pokemon, that knock themselves out, like Dusknoir and Dusclops, and have Pokemon that take themselves out of play, like the Dunsparce. So your bench is going to be very limited, right? And so if your opponent's just going to be able to just, with already a limited bench, just knock out multiple Pokemon on one turn, right? That's going to be very bad for you. That's why this card is in this deck, right? And that's why this card is even printed in the first place. Reversal energy decks are very high maintenance if you're not like attacking with something like a Luxray, right? And so, um, neutralization drone basically just gives you a way to buy turns so that you can set up your board, right? And again, this card has seen no play, right? So yeah, that's the trainer cards from this deck, and then the retrieval cards. You play, two Night Stretchers, one Power Pad, and then one Super Rod, right? So that's the training cards for this deck. And then for the energies, play 4 copies of Reversal Energy. You play 3 Psychics, right? So, um, yeah, that's Luxray Duskray, Dusknoir Luxray, right? Um, hope you enjoyed this video. And thank you for listening. And hope to see you in the next video.